Thank you very much. And as expected, the session on Punjabiyat started with making some noise. And we are here to break that myth that Punjabiyat is not all about noise, making noise. See, when we say, since the session is on Punjabiyat, legacy of hope, I think it is essential to define Punjabiyat before we go further. It is akin to Insaniyat, Rohaniyat. Similarly, you have Punjabiyat. I'm sure this suffix goes with certain states. You don't have Rajasthaniyat. You may have some other word for it. But yes, Punjabiyat is there, Kashmiriyat is there, and maybe there are some other. With southern states, again, you can't suffix this. So Punjabiyat essentially, like Insaniyat, is attributes and characteristics of being a good human being. Similarly, Punjabiyat also it relates to attributes and characteristics of being a good Punjabi. Now, the common perception of Punjabiyat, I'm sure you're all into Punjabi music. I see wherever the weddings happen in India, irrespective of the states they are being held, there is always a Punjabi song with, great dhamal beat playing and everybody is dancing to that. So most of the perception about Punjabiyat presently has emerged from pop culture to the outsiders, people who are from outside the state. But that's not about it. And Bollywood reinforces that perception among all other communities about Punjab, that it is all about balle balle, shava shava, butter chicken, stuff like that. So that all of you know that. And another cliched definition of Punjabiyat is if you talk to someone about Punjabi cultural identity or Punjabi culture, sarcastically they would say that Punjab's culture is agriculture. Personally, I have no objection to that because I think agriculture was the starting point of all the civilizations and cultures. After cognitive revolution, 70,000 years ago, it was 12,000 years ago, the agricultural revolution set the standards for the civilization. But the way it is said is something we take exception to. So I think today, the intent of today's session is to basically go beyond this perception. And what happens is that we also from Punjab are victims of this perception. Not only victims, we are reinforcers also. We respond to this perception. If we are outside, someone, say, Paiji, balle balle, we also, do, okay, balle balle. So we need to go beyond that. There are other resources which define our culture, the finer resources that we need to show you. And those resources are of any cultural identity, are literature, music, art traditions of a particular place, and most importantly, the history. Because it is the history that shapes the cultural identity. Whatever you see we are today, there's a huge history behind it, starting right from Indus Valley civilization, Harappan civilization, and going through Alexandra's invasions and so many other invasions by Abdali, Nader Shah. Everybody was coming to India through the Rakh-Khyber and they would pass through Punjab. So with all that gamut of history playing in the background, and then obviously along with this invasive history, there is another cultural history which came with those invasions. That was the Sufi culture, Bhakti movement, gurus, Sikh gurus. And then finally, the freedom movement, Maharaja Ranjit Singh's period. So all this defines the cultural identity of Punjabis, and we'll be touching upon that. And as I said, that history is what shapes the present. And present is so all-pervasive that sometimes, it camouflages the past and our heritage. Luckily, fortunately, we have among us two former ambassadors, but now I'll call them cultural ambassadors. They have been diplomats, but today here they are as cultural ambassadors, and they carry that legacy of our cultural heritage because they happen to take forward the legacy of their father and grandfather. As it was said in introduction, We have Navdeep Suri with us, whose grandfather, Nanak Singh, and Navtej Sarna, whose father, Mohinder Singh Sarna, Sardar Mohinder Singh Sarna, were among the greatest of writers in Punjabi literature, modern Punjabi literature. In fact, I would say they defined the movement of Punjabi literature, both in their own ways. So I think this is the background with which I would like to proceed further. Navdeep Suri has translated his grandfather's works. Navtej has translated his father's works, and apart from that, he has authored a few books on which have this element of history of Punjab. Navdeep, to quote from your, in fact, I would start with Navtej. I would quote epigraph of your book, Crimson Spring. Since we are talking about how history shapes our cultural identity, it says, a people's memory is history, and as a man without a memory, so a people without a history cannot grow wiser, better. Similar thing, if I have to say in a Punjabi idiom, which is typical of Punjabis, is that if you shoot a bullet at your past with a pistol, future will blast you with a cannon. It is translation of Rasul Hamzatov's Punjabi dictum कि जे तुसी अपने बीते ते गोली चलाओगे पिस्तौल नाल ते भविख भविष्य आपको ਤੁਹਾਨੂੰ ਤੋਪ ਨਾਲ ਫੁੰਡ ਦੇਗਾ. So that's why history is so important. So I just want to ask you, Navtej, how do you feel that this cultural identity that we have today and the perceived cultural identity, first of all, what is the basic difference between the two? And how do you see the literary tradition, especially the literature which has imbibed history of our region, shapes it?
Thank you. Thank you, Sarbjot. Pleasure to be here with you and Navdeep on this subject. I think what you have already defined the problem for us very well. That what has become a very common perception of the Punjabi, and shorthand is Punjabiyat, wrong shorthand, let me clarify, is basically a stereotypical images of a section of Punjabi community. So there are several layers there. But let me not get into the sectionalization. But this, what you see, is a stereotype. What you see in our food. For instance, every Punjabi is supposed to be sort of chomping on tandoori chicken most of the time, while he has a patiala peg in the other hand. And if he can stop performing bhangra at the same time. But that is absolutely wrong. I mean, for instance, on the meat part, my wife had conducted part of some survey on nutrition on a nationwide basis, and it has been found by the food survey conducted in the country that Punjab had the least meat-eating population, the least percentage in the entire country of non-vegetarians is in Punjab. Now, this is an absolute revelation. So, I mean, so I think these stereotypes, and unfortunately, these stereotypes have extended to our culture, to what you mentioned. I mean, what is considered Punjabi culture is, I saw some of it in the music lawn day before night. When there was a Punjabi singer, obviously he is very popular. And I don't understand that sort of Punjabi or whether that represents Punjabi culture. But for somebody who's not for Punjab, that seems to be Punjabi music. Our language, it is such a rich language. It is the language of Nanak, it is the language of Sheikh Farid, it is the language of Bulle Shah. But most people think that Punjabi is full of galis. So there are so many of these stereotypes, and it is our own you said that we sort of respond to it positively, so it carries on. Perhaps that's one thing. I think it's our own laziness. It's our own laziness to present the counter narrative. You know, we are happy to go along with this. We are happy to be the, the perpetual taxi drivers of the world. So we are not doing enough ourselves. So there's no point blaming the outside world. So if you go to Punjab today, why is everybody leaving? I mean, we'll come to that question later, but I just want to touch one point on that. Is its complete lack of pride in your history, in your culture, in your future. Complete lack of pride, as a complete depression that, anywhere outside this place is good, better for me than this place. So this is my initial comments, but happy to carry on what you say.
Navdeep, you have been also a diplomat, and there's a huge diaspora, Punjabi diaspora, and there's a Punjab which is here now. So how do you globally, like Navtej had mentioned, I mean, we're talking about pan-India image. How do you place Punjabi culture in a global context?
So, Sarbjot, let me just add that when we talk about Punjabi culture and literature, there are elements that cut across centuries, cut across generations. I can't think of a Punjabi in the Pakistani side, Indian side, or diaspora who doesn't relate to Heer Ranja or Soni Maiwal or Sassi Punnu or any of these romantic tales that we have that are so rooted in the rivers and the land. We saw much of that ripped apart by the upheavals of 1947, and I know we're going to come to that separately. I think the interesting trend that I see in the diaspora, particularly in the younger generation, is one is that they are not wedded to the borders that we see in South Asia. They're happy to work with each other. They don't need visas to meet each other. The whole dimension of cultural engagement on a first-person basis becomes easier. And so you have things like, you talk about Bulle Shah. So you have a group like Junoon from Pakistan, now Salman living in the US, working on Bulle Shah's lyrics. And you have a Rabbi Shergill who's lived overseas and lives in India and works on Bulle Shah. And so I think what you're seeing is a certain amount of revival of Punjabiyat in Toronto, in Vancouver, in Birmingham, even as it diminishes in Punjab itself. And it diminishes in a diminished Punjab. And we can talk about that at various levels, that, how Punjab shrunk from the land of 5 rivers to the land of 2.5 rivers on both sides. And what that meant, if Punjab was defined by the 5 rivers, the Punjab, what does that really mean in contemporary terms? And we can explore what these divisions, and then the foolishness of the Punjabi Suba movement in the 1960s, and in 67, the trifurcation of Punjab into further Haryana, Himachal, and what we see as the rump of Punjab that now remains. All of that, I think, has geographically diminished, and that has its own cascading effect then on other elements.
True. I agree. And as Navtej said, that it is our complacence because we happen to be in a geographically defined Punjab. And when you go out, as you said, in other countries, when you're displaced from here, you become very aware of you acutely become aware of your identity. It is an identity crisis which makes you become acutely aware of your identity, and you become more assertive to carry it forward. And then the boundaries diminish, everything else diminishes. It is the Punjabiyat which comes forward than all other borders that we have among us. Now, as I said, that the historic landscape of Punjab is very vast. And, it is very tumultuous also. The landscape is very rugged, jagged. Now, I don't want to go into history which is far removed from us, because we are talking about present cultural identity of Punjab. So starting from Indus Valley civilization and skipping all which has impacted us, all the invasions that we went through and everything, I'll focus on the period that started with Maharaja Ranjit Singh, which basically was relatively, throughout that, tumultuous history, a peaceful period for, let's say, at least 50 years. And that was the time I find that after having accumulated and evolving through Bhakti movements, Sikh Gurus movement, the Punjabi identity had got defined in a way. And it continued, up to Jallianwala Bagh in the first quarter of the 20th century, if I may say. And I want to come to these two periods, Jallianwala Bagh, and you just mentioned partition, then what happened during partition, because you have been very closely, both of you have been very closely associated with these two issues through your writings, through your translations. And so I will, again, as I said, explore those literary traditions through which we can explore the cultural identity of which we are product today. So starting with, as I said, till Jallianwala Bagh happened, till the early 20th century, we had a certain identity which, which cut across the communities, be it a Hindu, Muslim, or whatever community you belong to or religion you belong to. The Punjabiyat came before anything else. And we saw an evidence of that. And in the face of British rule, it rather got strengthened. Though they tried to, divide and rule was their policy, they couldn't do it as much. And the culmination of that unity we saw in Jallianwala Bagh massacre, where Hindus, Sikhs, Muslims, they all, died together, arms in arms, shoulders to shoulders. So I would like to, stop here and explore that value system. Let's freeze that point in history where that unique cultural identity, I think that was peak, in which, we were a harmonious entity, Navdeep. So you carry on with that. What was that defined, that value system, which we have now gone away from, of early 20th century? And I think with reference to the works that you have done in terms of, Navdeep has translated Khooni Vaisakhi, which is a poem about Jallianwala Bagh written by his grandfather, Nanak Singh Ji. And you can do some reading later, but you just tell us what it was, gist of that, and then you can do a reading to substantiate your point.
So I think what Sarbjot says, the context in Jallianwala Bagh was Amritsar city had two prominent leaders from the Congress party, Saifuddin Kichlu and Satyapal. And they were united in uniting their respective Hindu, Sikh, and Muslim communities to protest against the Rowlatt Act. And that spirit of unity was on display several days before the Jallianwala Bagh massacre happened. And the interesting thing about Khooni Vaisakhi is that it kind of portrays that spirit of the city during the run-up to the Jallianwala Bagh massacre on the 13th of April, 1919. And that unity, in some ways, is what sparked the action that the British took. After the massacre, the British appointed this Hunter Commission of Inquiry. And Miles Davis, who was then the British Deputy High Commissioner of Amritsar, was asked in the Hunter Commission that why did you take the steps that you did? And he says, I thought it was very sinister to see Muslims and Hindus drink from the same glass of water and eat from the same plate. I thought there was something sinister cooking. And reflecting back on 1857. The passage that Sarabjot refers to, there are a couple of passages. So on the 9th of April was Ram Navami, and it was celebrated by the Hindu, Muslim, and Sikh communities together in Amritsar. And that resulted, and you know, the processions were led by Saifuddin Kichlu and Satyapal in Amritsar. That prompted on the 10th of April the British to arrest both leaders and whisk them off to Dharamsala without informing anyone. The citizens of Amritsar, united, Hindus, Muslims, and Sikhs, went to protest to the deputy commissioner, and there was a firing, and about 30 people were killed on the railway footbridge in Amritsar. There's a scene that is portrayed in the book, which is of the funeral procession the next day, which I think beautifully captures the spirit of the city until the events of 1947. They straggled, drenched in anger and tears, distraught they truly were, my friends, carried corpses on their shoulders bent, limped back to their city sad, my friends. Hall Bazar's mosque was the night's abode for dead bodies placed in rows, my friends, heaved up next morning and off once again to Sultanwind's graveyard large, my friends. Funeral processions joined by thousands more walked angrily, dazed and distraught, my friends. Hindu, Sikh and Muslim strode side by side, hearts pierced by arrows sharp, my friends. The same grief and pain they shared, each bound by sorrow's same, my friend. Then a sight most wondrous was seen. It left us amazed and awed, my friends. Ya Hussain, cried out the Hindus and Sikhs, as Muslims echoed Ram Ram, my friends. And thus they reached graveyard together, Hindu, Muslim, and also the Sikh, my friends. Funeral pyres flamed for Hindus and Sikhs, with Muslims buried alongside, my friends. Others injured, wounded, and limping slow were taken to doctors from there, my friends. Asks Nanak Singh what happened next. Stay on and listen with me, my friends.
So I think this freedom movement was really a great factor of unity among the communities. And Navtej, you have written Crimson Spring, addressing the same time that around which Jallianwala Bagh happened. And we've almost captured, individual histories of each community, and then you beautifully brought them together when this incident, just before this incident happened, and how these all communities, different characters from these communities come together to play a united role. So can I also request you to make a few comments and, do some reading?
Yes, thank you. No, that is true. Actually, this spirit that you talk about, and you talked about Maharaja Ranjit Singh's time, I think that was the one point in history when things came together. Because Maharaja Ranjit Singh, while being a devout Sikh himself, did not run a Sikh kingdom. He ran a Punjab kingdom. And his court was not that all his ministers were Sikhs. In fact, there were very few who were Sikhs. His prime minister was a Dogra, Raja Dhyan Singh. His foreign minister was a Muslim, Fakir Azizuddin. There were 3 Muslim Fakir brothers. There were the 3 Dogra brothers. There were Hindu Pandits. And there were the Singhs, especially his cousins, the Sandawalias, etc., were very, very powerful in that kingdom. And so his was truly a Punjab kingdom. And this is something which then lasted through, despite the annexation of Punjab, in 1849, and was more or less intact in various ways, although we must remember that this was also a period which saw the solidification of communal identities. You saw the Arya Samaj becoming very active in Punjab, which was a revival of Vedic Hinduism. You saw Christian missionary work at its height. And you saw the Singh Sabha movement, which also tried to renew the Sikh movement, the Sikh identity. But these were not at conflict, except on certain occasions and on certain issues. So, I will not read the Ram Navami passage. I also have a Ram Navami passage in the book, but since Navdeep has already covered that, what I wanted to say was that it was very important to remember that when we are talking of Punjabiyat, we are talking of the history of Punjab, there were various historical currents flowing into Punjab at that time. There was the identity movement, the Singh Sabha movement, the Gurdwara reform movement. There was the Khilafat movement beginning. There was Gandhi Satyagraha beginning. There was the return of the soldiers from the First World War. Now we must remember that out of 1.4 or 1.5 million soldiers that India contributed to the First World War, about 1 million of them were from Punjab. And a lot of them, and they were Punjabi Sikhs, there were Hindus, and there were Punjabi Muslims. So again, there was that spirit. They fought together in the trenches together. And when they came back, they had no idea that we were going to be against each other. Their only idea was, we want the British out. And there was an expectation that we have come back, we have shed blood for the British abroad in the First World War against people who were not our enemies. They were enemies of the British. They were not enemies of Indians. And now we should get some sort of reward. Instead, they got the Rowlatt Act and Jallianwala Bagh, which we have heard about. So if you permit, one of the characters in my book, Crimson Spring, is a soldier, a Sikh soldier who fights abroad in Europe and in Palestine and comes back. And he, purely by chance, happens to be at Jallianwala Bagh that day. Because Jallianwala Bagh, although the part of it was a protest meeting against the Rowlatt Act, there were a lot of people, a lot of men and children, very few women, because women normally did not go out to political meetings. And they were just hanging around. There were people who had come to a cattle fair. They had people who had come to the Gurdwara. It was Baisakhi. And then they just came and were resting there. Now this soldier, Kirpal Singh, is just resting there. And what he starts to see reminds him so much of the war when the shooting starts. So if you permit, I'll read that out.
Please, please. Looking forward.
It came back to him again in the Bagh. Why had he fought for the Angrez? But there was no time for thought. The screaming and wailing was still all around him. But he could no longer hear the whistling bullets. The firing had stopped. This is after 10 minutes of relentless firing. The soldiers had broken file. He saw a group of Gurkhas, kukris in hand, moving towards the crowd. They were moving towards the Hansli, the drain into which many of the crowd had jumped. A bitter anger rose inside Kirpal. He didn't have a bayonet, else he would have rushed the Gurkhas. He wouldn't let a single unarmed person be cut down by a kukri. Just then there was a whistle from the captain and the Gurkhas turned back, sheathing their knives. Then the soldiers followed the officers out on the double, back through the narrow entrance through which they had come. He looked all around him. This was worse than any battlefield he had seen. The dead were everywhere. In the middle of the Bagh, at the foot of the walls they had tried to scale, piled up against the narrow exits. They were the fortunate ones who no longer felt any pain. Everybody else was suffering. Those who were bleeding and dying, asking for water, trapped under dead bodies and unable to breathe, and those forlornly looking for their loved ones, hoping they would hear a call, a name, a sign, however desperate, of recognition. This was a desperately unfair and unequal battle, he thought, as he began to help the wounded. And then he thought, this was no battle. The bullets had been fired by just one side. The other had been unarmed, defenseless, without even the uncertain shelter of a trench. There was no hope of any medicos coming out, or men carrying stretchers, or canteens of water. No hope of redemption, or rescue, or repair. The dying had been left to die on their own. He tried as best as he could, tearing up turbans to make bandages, shutting the eyes of the dead still staring at the darkening sky, helping the lightly wounded to the exits, dismantling the piles of dead bodies to pull out those who still had a chance to survive. If only Hazur or Bir or any of the others had been with him, he thought, he could have done much more. But they were with the unit or on leave. The thought still nagged. Why had the boys of the 59th fired on him? He had fought everywhere with them as part of the Jalandhar Brigade. I'll stop it.
So that was the disillusionment with the British Empire, as you said, and that's, I think, that is what brought the communities together. But now I'll quickly move on to just a quarter of a century later. Imagine, what a disruption of this value system, and what a sudden shift happened that the same people who had died together at Jallianwala Bagh and who would go on Ram Navami together, they would be at each other's throats when partition happened in 1947. And I will not now make a rhetoric about this whole thing. I would directly get to you because, Navdeep, you have also translated Agg di Khed, The Game of Fire, and a prequel to that, Khoon Vaisakhi. So both of them were hymns of blood. So could you just talk about this? How come this happened within less than quarter of a century?
I think in view of the limited time, this is just my grandfather's voice 28 years later. You heard him, what he wrote after Jallianwala Bagh, and 28 years later, he's making a comparison. And he says about Vaisakhi in 1947, it is said that history has a way of repeating itself. And that's what Amritsar seemed to be doing on this Vaisakhi after 28 years. Once again, innocent people were being killed in the city. Once again, the city was being charred by angry fires. But look a little deeper, and you would see that the two situations are like chalk and cheese. 28 years ago, it was the British Empire that had decided to drive the city's Hindus, Muslims, and Sikhs into a cauldron. It was the blood of the three communities that had mingled to drench the hallowed earth of Jallianwala Bagh and give its soil a crimson hue. It was the sight of the three communities sharing the same glass of water that had lifted the patriotic spirits of the nation. Today, those events seem like a tale from the distant past. That same Vaisakhi, that Khooni Vaisakhi, has once again descended on our city like an evil spirit. Once again, there's a curfew and the bazaars are shut. But on that day, we had seen the patriotic fervor of our people as they defied the curfew to gather in Jallianwala Bagh and demand an end to the rule of the Angrez. Today, our people have donned the mantle of Satan himself, thirsting for the blood of the neighbors as they step into the streets. And just last couple of lines, let's look at the blessed Jallianwala Bagh, the land of our martyrs. Its expansive ground is once again teeming with people. But if the Vaisakhi night of 28 years ago saw the Bagh strewn with hundreds of corpses, today it is heaving with the bodies of the living dead. The families of thousands of luckless refugees have made the Bagh a temporary abode, occupying every inch of it, some spreading out on bare ground to find some sleep, while others bemoan their misfortune and ponder nervously over an uncertain future.
My God. Yeah. So I think that gives us an account of what started happening. And Punjabiyat, I think the kind of setback that it suffered in partition has never been able to recover it. The geopolitical, social, cultural, the whole, that what made Punjab was completely disrupted. We were geographically divided. We were historically, culturally, we got divided. And we have never been able to recover from it, Punjab. And I think people in other parts of India may not identify with that kind of gravity with which, or gravitas that we attach to partition. So there's no time for more reading, but Navtej, I want your views on this. Why did it happen in such a less time?
I think it happened not because some sudden enmity grew between the communities. It happened because of the political situation as it devolved, and in the time leading up to freedom and up to partition. It happened when communal panic was created. It happened because people had no idea what was happening, what was going to be happening, and then the mob frenzy took over. And then there was a reactive mob frenzy on the other side. It was quite simple as that. So it is, we must not think that every Muslim was out to kill every Sikh and Hindu, or that every Sikh in Punjab was out to kill every Muslim that he could see. There were certain sections of people, and this is where literature comes in. The stories that I have translated in The Savage Harvest, each of the stories has a character from the community whom you would think is causing the problem, but it is that character who shows humanity. It is that character who shows hope. So the point was that every human being did not go crazy. There were sections of people in each community who became victims of, communal anger and had victims themselves, something which, Navdeep's recent translation also shows. And there were people, and that was the sense of hope, and that is the sense of Punjabiyat. There were people who still maintained their humanity despite having a different religion. And they were the people who, we have to look towards if we have to look towards Punjabiyat.
True, true. We will be encroaching upon question-answer session, but we have to have some closing lines because I will just set today's context. What are the lessons then learned from history? And I now here would like to go beyond Punjabiyat to Hindustaniyat also. We still, after having had Jallianwala Bagh, partition, which could have been great lessons for us, not to repeat them, but we still have, in the last century, since Jallianwala Bagh, so many riots, pogroms, lynchings, bulldozings, everything is happening. And if partition is not happening physically, it is happening in our hearts and minds. So for Punjab, particularly, we see this crisis of not only identity crisis, but existential crisis now, with that exodus opening of the youth from our state, with the drugs problem, environmental problem, debt problem. So I just want closing lines from both of you. What is the way forward?
The theme of the session was hope. Last year, we were building our house in Amritsar, and we had a crew of painters who was entirely Muslim, entirely from UP. And there was violence happening in Haryana around Nu last year, if you remember. And these guys were getting frantic calls from their family. And I overheard the supervisor telling his family, please don't worry, we are in Punjab, we are completely safe here. And I think maybe that's the spirit of Punjabiyat, of embracing and welcoming, and perhaps regaining what we lost in 1947. And again, radiate that into the rest of the country, that there's a different model which is inclusive. That's what the Gurus taught us. Whether it is Guru Nanak's philosophy, with Bala and Madana by his side, whether it is Guru Gobind Singh telling us, Nanak, Manas ki jaat sabe ke pehchan bo, we are all one creed of humanity. And I think that message needs to go out perhaps across politics or over politics into the people.
Please.
I absolutely agree with what Navdeep has said, and I think how the message has to go forth is through us. So I think what Punjab has to do is really to stop looking for a solution that will come from the center, or to stop looking for a solution that will come from Canada or wherever. I think the cities, the towns of Punjab need to begin to celebrate themselves. I think what you need to instill back there is a sense of hope. And I think that, frankly, is what is totally missing today.
Thank you. So, last couplet के चमन में इखलाते रंगो बू से बात बनती है हम ही हम हैं तो क्या हम हैं तुम ही तुम हो तो क्या तुम हो. So now with this I open the discussion to the house. Please, if there are questions, raise your hands. Yes, please, the lady in the second row, please.
Thank you. This morning in a session, we heard a speaker say, rather than talking about intergenerational trauma, let's talk about intergenerational strength. And I wonder if that's something that could apply in the Punjabi context.
So what we are witnessing, and I live in Amritsar, I witness a remarkable absence of rancor towards Pakistan. I see much more of it when I move further away from Amritsar, further away from Punjab. It's almost as if intergenerationally, the people of Punjab have decided that this was one of the many episodes in Punjab's long and turbulent history that happened, and you get over that. So I think purely in terms of reconciliation of the divisions of partition in the hearts and minds, perhaps more has happened paradoxically in the state that suffered the most than in communities elsewhere when you move further away from Punjab. You see a much greater willingness to make peace with Pakistan in Punjab for economic reasons, but also cultural reasons, the shared language and culture factor, than you see in other parts of India. And there is, it sometimes rankles that, but Punjab doesn't control its destiny in that. It is part of a larger picture and must accept that.
Hello, sir. Good evening. My question is for the panel. We as a Punjabi feel really proud about a city called Chandigarh. All right. So my question is, for the last 50 to 70 years, that was the dream city of Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru. And now and then I hear and I read the news about the furniture that was being built by the architect, Mr. Le Corbusier, and his partners all over in India, the architect partners. That's been sold in Paris for millions of rupees, you know. So why nothing has been done out there in that particular city that Punjabis really feel proud about? Why they are letting it go and nothing has been done for it? Please
Yeah.
tell me.
You know, the moderator is an architect. I think he should take the
Yes,
question.
Yeah,
yes,
so
that's why I've
take
asked
it,
that
yes.
question actually.
So I think that comes from our general complacence towards our heritage. As we just talked about this, that Punjabiyat, we don't go back to our roots. We don't respect our built heritage, along with other heritage that we just mentioned, and that's what we were trying to bring about. You can sit down, please. So it is a general thing. It is not about, like, Corbusier is still relatively in history a modern heritage, but our old heritage also. I mean, so much so that whenever there's a political problem, what happened during Blue Star operation was a political problem. But what we did, we demolished the oldest heritage of Amritsar. We drew a 30-meter, we took a compass, took 30-meter area around Golden Temple and demolished everything. And that was the built heritage, which was 500 years old. So we don't value it. So I think it applies to everything. That is what we are talking. We need to, bring that out. I'll just share a small story here. In our own university, our chairs, which were designed by Le Corbusier, were being sold for 20,000 rupees. And when we refused, they said 50,000. Then again we refused. They said 1 lakh. Then our eyes opened. What is wrong with, or what is right with this chair? We found out that it was heritage material. So we retained it.
But I wouldn't worry about Le Corbusier's furniture. All of the art, the treasure of the Maharaja Ranjit Singh kingdom is today abroad.
Yes.
And in a way, I'm glad, because where it is, it's really being taken care of. But possibly in some future, on an ideal day, in an ideal Punjab, you will have the situation where all this can be brought back and taken care of properly.
Okay, one quick question. Yeah. Right next to you.
Thank you so much for this, I would say, It's on? Okay. Thank you so much for this session. I would say it was very heartfelt. And when you talked about the sense of unity that we used to have in the rise of fundamentalism and protectionism and everything that you might know, and I wouldn't want to go into that. I just want to ask you to give, all three of you, to give a few words of advice to the youth who gets stereotyped and all of the things that you talked about. So what is your advice for the youth?
I think you have to reject the stereotype. And the only way to reject a stereotype is to present a convincing counter-narrative by your own activity.
Want to say something? No, I think we are out of time here. I hope it has satisfied your answer. Thank you. Thank you very much.